Zoom. We hope that you enjoyed the show tonight. And now we're going to have a talk back with my esteemed colleague and partner at New Swan Shakespeare Center and Festival, Julia Lupton. And I'm sure Julia is familiar to all of you. She is a professor of English and a Shakespearean scholar and has really worked very closely with us on this production. So I'm going to turn it over to Julia now, and then I will return with the cast after her remarks. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Eli. It was just such a huge privilege to be a part of this production, and attending all the rehearsals gave me a chance to think long and hard about the concept behind it. So you saw that it's called A Midsummer Night's Zoom. It's not A Midsummer Night's Dream. We begin in a place called Zoomland, and in Zoomland, everyone is on separate screens with interiors carefully curated by Eli and the actors. Then the young people and the rude mechanicals escape into the forest, and they've escaped Zoomland. And we've signified that by having shared backgrounds as well as the Snapchat filters. But of course, our actors are still performing on Zoom. We're not in Aldrich Park or in our beautiful New Swan Theater or even socially distanced in someone's backyard. And the actors asked Eli a couple of times, well, how does that work? Have we really left Zoomland? We're still on Zoom. So I've been thinking about that a lot. And here's what I've come up with. In art and in life, human beings use constraints to overcome constraints. That's what it means to be creative, to exercise ingenuity, to practice our freedom. Right, so in the first part, Zoom represents our new isolation from each other, right? Oh no, more Zoom. But Zoom is also a tool for repurposing our ways of relating to each other. Some of us can sometimes even feel more connected now because of our communications are more intentional and more precious. And I think Zoom theater has a big role to play in this. People have asked Eli, why did you take this on? And it really comes back to affirming theater as a way of gathering people together in a common place. First, the actors and the artistic team have to come together. And we see this inside A Midsummer Night's Zoom when the actors, the rude mechanicals, have their roll call, and then they go into the forest to perform at night in secrecy. And we were doing that every night for 2 weeks, as we gathered on Zoom from all over the country, Southern California, Northern California, Texas, New York. And then tonight, which is the culmination of all of this, we gather a much bigger group in performance. The cast plus all of you, Irvine, Los Angeles, San Diego, Connecticut, Seattle, New York. And so we create a new virtual space, a new common space through our live chat, our watch party, our talkback, and our memories. So what we've done, what you've done, what they've done, is use Zoom to overcome Zoom, to use constraints to overcome constraints. And guess what? Shakespeare was actually doing the same thing in his theater, right? The Midsummer Night's Dream in 1596 began in Athens on a bare stage. And when moved to the forest, it was still a bare stage. It began in daylight and switched to moonlight, but that stage was still filled with sunshine. And so Shakespeare was relying on the imagination and the good faith of the audience to co-create that forest with the actors. And that's really what we've asked you to do tonight as well. So Zoomland, separate screens. Separate backgrounds, isolation. Forest, shared backgrounds, implying a common space. Now, what do you think is going to happen when the young lovers wake up and return to Zoomland? Separate or shared? You're going to have to find out tomorrow night. So I want to give a big round of applause to our amazing team I want to invite them to come back into our shared space here in Zoom. And we've asked you to post some questions and comments in the chat. And so let's see what we have here. Patricia Diaz has a question. What was the most difficult scene to convert to Zoom? We're still waiting for our actors to come back. But Eli, you want to take that on as the director? And unmute thyself.
Sure. I was waiting for the actors to come on, so I'm sorry. Can you repeat the question, Julia?
Sure. We have a question from Patricia Diaz. What was the most difficult scene to convert to Zoom? I think that's a good question for our director.
Well, I think the final scene of that part one, where you have the four lovers in the four squares, and everyone had to know where the other three lovers were situated and focus to them accordingly. That took a lot of work and a lot of arranging, a lot of planning, and also the actors had to come into that scene in a particular sequence so that they were aligned properly. That was a really super tricky scene, I would say.
Absolutely. We have a question from Jessica Kurohara, and this may be some of the actors would like to respond to. What did the actors incorporate into their processes to cultivate connection with each other? Anyone want to take that on?
Nobody else is talking, so I guess I'll chime in, like always, filling the awkward silences. I would say part of what we benefited from, I think, at least I can speak for me and maybe most of us, is that we've all worked with each other together. We, in part sort of drew on our past experiences, but I guess that's no different than any other circumstance. You draw on what you know, you draw on your personal history, you draw on personal experiences. And if you haven't had them with the actors you're working with, I think most, if not all of us, have been trained to project onto our scene partner what we need them to be to tell the story we need to tell. So while it's definitely a weird medium to try to connect, I think some of that connection was enhanced by everyone's willingness to sort of open up to people that they've worked with before or people that they're working with for the first time.
Great. Anyone else want to answer that question as well? How do you create connection in a project like this? Tolu?
I think we started off well with I don't know if I'm giving a secret away here, but the snap cameras. That was just the most fun. Watching Greg put on the bottom head really kind of like lightened the mood and created connectivity between everyone. Just playing with the different filters on Snapchat on the camera was, I don't know, it made me coming into this process completely new. To the group and to the play, made it seem like, oh, I can just hang out with these people. And so the whole play was just us talking like ourselves.
Beautiful. That's great. Here's a question from Karen Serenity. And maybe Caden could answer this. What was the creative rationale between Lysandra versus the original Lysander? Is Caden here? I'm not sure Caden could make it to this. Oh yeah, Caden's here. Yeah, Caden.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm sure Eli could talk about this as well, because it was really his decision to cast it this way and to change Lysander to Lysandra. But we, Eli and I worked together back in 2018 when we did the show live and in person, and then again now. I think, I don't want to speak for Eli, but I think it was just really important that we told the story of, different types of love in a Shakespeare play. Shakespeare's traditionally done with heterosexual couples, and that's not the only couple there is. So just, more representation.
Great. Here's a question for Thomas Varga, who played Puck. Can you comment about the use of arm movements and what it's like to do physical theater in this very unphysical format?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I think transitioning from having a space like the Swan, where I think Eli even talked about when they were designing the Swan, uh, making it to physical specifications to really have a lot of uh, space to the kind of perfect space that one would need to kind of do scene work. And having worked there, kind of going beyond that, climbing on walls and things in other productions, having a lot more sorry, choking space to move. Then when you rein it back into this kind of space where we got a green screen behind us and we're kind of in a small little constrained space, trying to keep that same sense of physical play, especially for a character like Puck or one of the fairies, where there's a lot of kind of movement there. I think it kind of just went into just the arms, I guess. Then you have less space, but trying to keep the physicality there instead of just being seated. I know a lot of us, including me, started this process just sitting at the desk. And I think a lot of us started to realize that if we could, getting up and adding some more physicality to this, I think made it feel more like acting, besides just, being on another Zoom call. So that was kind of my experience.
Great. This is, I think, a question for Eli. I think a lot of people, we saw this also in the live chat during the streaming, are really interested in the squares. And I think people are, we've got some drama teachers and others here in the chat. How do you get the squares to line up? I mean, I think that, and that was something that was very striking in the transition from Zoomland to the forest, is that suddenly squares were in communication and things weren't simply frontal. You want to talk about the discovery of that, the process, and why it's so important to this production?
Sure, we're really just figuring things out as we go. And thankfully, I have this amazingly talented group of actors with me helping, and who are also younger than I am, so they're more technologically savvy. But we didn't really know what we could or couldn't do. We thought originally that we would be able to arrange the squares with a computer program that our technician, Merle DeWitt III, was going to control, but that didn't work. So we went from Skype to Zoom, and then we discovered that as the actors appear, their windows arrange from left to right, from top to bottom. So number one would be top left, number two top right, and then number three bottom left, bottom, and then number four bottom right. And we figured that out, but we didn't know that going in, and it seemed to work every time. So that was just a discovery we made early on. And once we knew that, then we knew that it was going to be really important to sequence the entrances, especially so that people weren't looking away from their partner because they were on the wrong side. So it's not rocket science, but it's a little tricky. And the actors in this case, aside from in a real theater having to grab their props and do costume changes, they had to be very conscious of when to appear, that they would unmute, that prior to that they were in the right backgrounds, and often also using snap filters. So really, all of that was on the company to be able to handle. And it didn't always work, but every time we made a mistake, we learned from it. We didn't beat ourselves up. We just go back and try it again till we could finally get it right.
Great. Here's a question that maybe Maya and Tristan could take up together, since your relationship in the play is so fraught and also has so much of the comedy as well as the pathos in it. The question is, was there a need for actors to provide a stronger emotive energy in this Zoom format to overcome the digital separation?
Great question.
I'd say no. I think it's just a difference in focus. We found that the like projecting didn't really get us that far, but we still have to structure, as we call it in a lot of our vernacular. We still have to make it clear what we're doing, It's not like a question of like bigger or smaller. It's more like just focusing the shift to this is the audience right here versus in the Swan where it's this 360 view.
I think it's also a commitment of imagination. Not commitment of imagination, but it's imagination and commitment, actually, those two things. I'm not going to conflate the two, but I'd say that it's more of those two combined, because in reality, you know, I look up and to my left to try to look at Lysandra during the fight scene, and I'm looking at, you know, where a wall meets the ceiling. I'm not, you know, so I think there I just have to commit to, you know, what I'm saying and, you know, what others are saying and how those things make me feel, me, Demetrius. And then, you know, I think from there, as long as you stay in it, or at least I'll speak for myself, as long as I stay in it, I'm golden. I just have to commit to the imagination and the circumstances.
We said this in our talk about like on Saturday, but it's similar to like giving a monologue in an audition where it's like you're looking at like a sticky note or like something in the back or an X or something, and you have to give it that same amount of imagination or life to that spot.
Yep.
Sean has something.
And Crystal, do you want to comment on that too? And then I'll come back to Sean. I just want to keep with the young lovers for a minute, where so much of that emotional frisson is.
I got carried away by their answer. Could you repeat the question, please?
Well, just, you know, you've played this face to face and now you're playing it on Zoom. And how do you gather that emotional energy, both with your BFF and with this lover who seems to be abandoning you? And yet you're not in the same room with them. And you're often not even looking at your screen because you're looking profile to create the illusion of this shared space. So what is that like? And what do you do as an actor to make that happen for us?
Yeah, the adjustment to staring at a wall in my ceiling was definitely the hardest because my walls are not a color I like right now. But it was, well, I think we had a lot of advantage that we got to do it in the Swan for 3 months. And so there was so much building off of that. And also we went to school with each other for 3 years. So there's already relationships that are formed through that. But also it is very different on Zoom because you can't feel their energy like, oh, they're about to say something, like I'm looking at a screen. And so, but you just have to personalize it. Like I know what my relationship with Caden is as a person, and I know what my relationship with Tristan and Maya is, you know, and just personalizing my relationship with them into the character was very, very helpful.
Great. And Sean, you wanted to comment on that too?
Oh, I was just going to back up what Tristan was saying about imagination, and now, of course, what Crystal was saying about personalization. I was just going to say that on camera as well, for maybe even decades now, they've been doing the same thing. This idea of imagination, personalization is getting people through green screen work, is getting people through different points of focus for on-camera work. Maybe they're scene partners out there and they're looking at a tennis ball sometimes. I think this kind of work is popping up, and Zoom is certainly one of the opportunities to work that skill that Tristan and Crystal were talking about.
Absolutely. Here's a nice question from Kari Ferber. Were there any surprising benefits of doing this over Zoom? And they provide a, quote, silly example, like performing in air conditioning, but are there things that you felt that Zoom opened up for you as actors, for you as a director, Eli? What were the new possibilities? And maybe someone who hasn't had a chance to, like, Greg, do you have thoughts about that? You're both an actor and a drama teacher. What are your thoughts about Zoom and Zoom theater and the future of this medium?
Whoa, yeah. Well, the person who asked the question stole a little bit of my thunder because I thought I just have a great dressing room, you know, and it's a short commute to work. But that's not really it. What is it? What's different? Is that sort of the question, or what?
Are there any new benefits or new things opened up from an acting point of view?
I guess that I think the only benefit I can think of for me is when I'm not in front of the camera, I have a lot of space to tend to my business otherwise. But that's the only one I can think of. Maybe my colleagues can think of other benefits. Well, here's one, right? Here's one. There are people all across the country who can participate. So in theory, more access for all different sorts of people. So that would be the real benefit. My first thought when I sort of went no was I don't get to be in a real live room with all these wonderful people, and that I miss terribly. But really, access opens up. So the future of this, I don't know, but I hope that if anything, just more and more access for people. That would be my hope. In terms of acting, no, not for me. I mean, having a real live human being right with us, with me anyway, in the room, I can't. There's no replacement for that. As we all know from our social lives now, we can do this. But when we're in a room with other people, even if it's masked and 6 feet away, it's a little better than this in terms of feeling human connection. So
Does anyone else have thoughts about, anyone felt like they discovered anything in Zoom that they might take with them back into regular acting, or that they might develop in a Zoom practice?
I can speak on that.
Yeah.
I think the biggest challenge was like in the fight scene, we choreographed this whole fight in the Swan, and I get very angry in it and I scream a lot. But in this version, if I scream or if any of us projected way louder than our usual volume, it would blow out Zoom. And so we had to learn how to locate the emotion in a different part of our register, lower our volume a lot. And also like placing the emotion into a different part of the body helped. So that was definitely a learning experience.
Great, excellent. There is a couple of questions about the settings, and that's probably an Eli question. Do you want to talk about your choice of the backgrounds and your vision for the visuals of this play?
Sure. I don't know if there were more specific questions about them, but in general, before we get to the forest, the idea is that everybody's zooming in from wherever it is that they hang out. Like you can see Fox right now on he's still got his palace shot up because he's the ruler of the land, and everybody else had their own windows. And when we got to the forest, I tried to choose backgrounds that were evocative, that said something about the scene itself, and that also would line up with multiple windows up and look like one forest. I was really happy with the very first forest shot that has a little bit of a lake in front, because the line of the trees goes straight across the screen and then it lines up. There you can see it's on Thomas's screen now. So it lines up straight across. I also tried to track the time of day, but I didn't do a great job with that because I couldn't always find really terrific trees that I liked at night. But I also, I wanted some magic in there if I could find it, and try to evoke the feeling of the scene. So I probably looked at way too many forest photos. I mean, I was literally kind of going blind, but I chose about 50 initially, and then we narrowed it down to, I think, maybe 13 or something like that, 13 or 14.
I see people are sharing some of these backgrounds as we talk.
Right.
Fox and Meg, do you want to say something about your conception of the royal couple and what you were trying to achieve? Unmute thyself.
Did you mean? Sorry. Me
Oh, I'm
or-
sorry. I'm sorry. Fox and Hope. I'm sorry.
Meg can speak for me.
No.
No, you're
Sorry
good.
about that.
No, you're good. Fox,
Well, I think, added along to what this show is really doing for people. For me, Shakespeare, this is my first time performing Shakespeare. And I know that when I was in high school, I didn't think like people of color could do Shakespeare, or that it was meant for people of color, because I always saw people, i.e., straight cisgendered people or straight cisgendered white people, playing the role. So I never thought it was for me. So now you look at this screen and it's just full of colorful people inside and out. And I think that there is a huge benefit, because I know people are like, this is written so long ago, besides the words like why now. And I think that from what Eli has done with turning Lysander into Lysandra, as well as just seeing different people, I've been talking a bit to a bunch of people about representation and how people want to see themselves. That's why they want to go watch things. So I think that with Hope and I being this couple of power, we're not peasants, we're not maids, we are basically king and queen. I think like having that, first off, we are kings and queens, so it's just putting on the shoe that should have already been there. And it's just like Hope and I have such a chemistry. We've done so many things together, so it wasn't that hard to believe that she was my wife, or my future wife, soon to be. Yeah.
I hope you want to add something to that. That was great, Fox.
Yeah, no. I mean, I would echo everything that he just said, and it was really a joy, I think, yeah, to be a part of this, specifically because what you're bringing up, Fox, and such a beautiful, diverse cast that we have here, and to have this very woke, cool leaders to be like, no, you can love whoever the heck you want, and to stand for that. And yeah, and like Fox said, we've been able to work together a lot. So I think that helped in how we were able to play off of each other. So it was just a lot of fun, and I feel very thankful to be part of it.
Great. And then maybe we're going to be ending in a minute, but there's a question here about fantasy and rhymed verse versus sincerity and emotional expression, which is always a tension in Shakespeare. I wonder whether some of the character actors who played the rude mechanicals and the fairies would want to comment on that. Kieran or Michael or Tolu, come back in and tell us about your experience with this.
I think Michael should speak.
Yeah, Michael, you want to?
Sorry, can you just reread the question for me?
Well, sort of the element. This is like there's a lot of rhyme in this play, but there's also a lot of prose. Like, how do you balance the naturalism of the rude mechanicals with the kind of pure lyricism of the fairies?
I think it's really fun because the fairy world, I keep thinking about every single time we've done this in rehearsal. My favorite part is when we get to that opening song that Jalen sings amazingly. And that is probably, I think, one of the most rhymey parts of it for me. And there's something that's really easy to get into because of it feels musical, even when you're speaking it, when you have those rhyming couplets, or later on in part 2, when you get to the play within the play, the mechanicals even take that on. And they get to their own like clunky way, try to make sense of this very, staccatic music that they're trying to make. And so it's like really fun, like figuring all of that out, but then also having the prose, which just kind of opens up for you and allows you to have fun with these amazing people. It's a banter, just throwing it back and forth. We've had so many Zoom rehearsals from figuring out how we did it in real time, where we could just speak back and forth and then trying to time it with the lag. So it's been broken up because we had our own rhythms, both in the free open prose and then the verse, but then having to also fit in the restrictions of Zoom was pretty fun in like figuring out that new rhythm that we had as a group. I mean, the show has its own, but then each little group also has their own little beat they drum to. So it's all just music. It's fun. Anyway.
Jalen, you want to comment about the music, the singing? You were so great in this.
Thank you. Yeah, it's funny because the songs were written for Annika since the first time by Alan, And Eli was like, you know what? You can do whatever you want with the music this time. You can make it the same. And so I kind of took it upon myself to lower it, first of all. And then on top of that, play around with it, see what I got joy out of singing, which I think was part of why the fairies should sing. And I think there's great joy in that. So I took some pride in changing it up a little bit for myself.
Great. So this last question is for Eli. And it's from Ken Reinhardt. And he wants to know, what's next for Zoomlandia and New Swan Shakespeare? Is there gonna be more, or is this it?
Well, I'll echo Greg. We would like more than anything to be back in our magical theater in the round and performing for people in the theater, but we really don't know, in all honesty, when that will be. For the time being, we know that we have to distance, and this was a great experiment, and I will say it's feeling like it worked, although it was very frustrating at times and challenging. But I think ultimately we're going to have a feeling of accomplishment and a feeling of it having worked well enough for us to consider doing another show. So I always start thinking about the next show just as the show that I'm working on is starting to close down, but I'm not quite ready to talk about it yet. But we're definitely thinking that we can do this. And even if people are in different places, again, that access, that ability to connect through the internet allows us to do lots of things. Ironically, too, I got an email today from a colleague that was about, you guys will all laugh when you hear this, but Zoom is upgrading everything to accommodate theater, like right now. So we're going to look back and say we were really stuck with the early model, right? Like we think about computers way back when, when there were big clunky things and now they're all streamlined. They're fixing the sound. They're making it so you can arrange the windows. I mean, they're coming up with stuff. So it may be that a lot of the hurdles we had to jump are going to be lowered for us by Zoom. I guess time will tell, but we'll certainly continue to produce as a festival because this is what we do, and it's what our audience wants from us. Our friends and patrons to connect. So
Beautiful. Well, I want to just give you all a huge applause again. It's been such an honor to work with all of you. To our audience, please come back tomorrow night for part 2 and see how the mystery develops and how it resolves, because it's really pretty fantastic. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, audience.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks all.